Hey guys, it's Ollie, welcome back to my YouTube channel. So I had a poll asking you guys if you wanted a video on snails and deep retraction syndrome, or if you wanted a video on snail pet keeping myths. The snail myths won by like a landslide. So that is what I'll be doing today. I know I put a disclaimer at the beginning of this video as well in text form, but I'm going to say it right here, right now. I am not by any means an expert. These are just things that I have come across in my research and in keeping snails. These could be incorrect. Our stuff changes all the time, especially in snail keeping since it is still so new. So please bear that in mind. Not everyone agrees on it. I'm just going off of the current scientific studies and what people are finding in their stuff. A lot of these do come from people in groups helping me out by giving me some examples, and then I would research that further and come up with a list. So these are 5 myths in snail keeping. So the first myth is that you should not feed your snail kale or spinach. So people used to believe that the oxalates in kale and spinach would keep the snails or restrict the snails from absorbing calcium. However, this has been pretty debunked since then and never really made a lot of sense in the first place. The reason it doesn't make much sense is that we fed snails food much higher in oxalates than kale or spinach are, and they were fine. Think of berries and mint, for example, some beans, things like that. It just never really made a lot of sense, but that has been thoroughly debunked, and I do feed mine those pretty occasionally. So myth number 2 is that you should not use peat-based substrate. The myth of this made sense. It came around because peat is pretty acidic, and those acids can harm your snails, including scarring on the shell. However, peat-based substrate is just fine as long as you neutralize the pH. To do this, you would mix about 44 grams of limestone flour or calcium carbonate per liter of substrate. If you do that, then it'll neutralize the pH of the peat-based substrate and it'll be perfectly fine to use. The third myth is that citrus is bad for your snails. So yet another acidic-based myth. So when it comes to ingesting, citrus is just fine. It's not going to kill your snail or anything. Snails can digest it just fine. They can ingest it just fine. So things like lemon, lime, grapefruit, oranges, they're fine. Again, I see where this comes from. There hasn't really been much study on that it will hurt your snail. However, I would feed them in moderation, and I also would feed it outside of their enclosure because prolonged exposure to citrus can do harm to their shells, like scarring their shells. So do it at your own risk, but they can ingest it just fine. I personally don't really give them a lot of citrus. I just never really saw a point to it, but once in a while I'll give them a little piece of orange or a little piece of grapefruit outside of their enclosure. So the next myth is that you can't feed your snail tomato or raw carrot. So these are a little odd. These never really made a ton of sense to me. The tomato one made a little bit more sense. The reason that you shouldn't feed tomato was because the acidity levels, once again, but tomato is perfectly fine for snails. There's no harm. As far as the carrot one goes, I'm not really sure how that myth came about. I think the same myth is with potato. I don't really know, but I was always advised whenever I started keeping to not feed my snails raw carrots because snails can't digest it properly. Which again, never really made a ton of sense to me, but I mean, it's perfectly fine to feed your snails raw carrot, that's fine. And it's actually better than cooked or boiled carrots because cooking a vegetable does get rid of some of the nutritional value. So boiling or cooking carrots gets rid of a lot of those nutrients that you're trying to give your snail by feeding them carrot in the first place. Those have been thoroughly debunked. Those have been very old myths in the snail keeping community that for me never made any sense. The other ones at least make some sense to me. This one never made any sense to me. And the 5th and last snail myth. I get comments all the time that people own snails and they have concerned loved ones. And they have concerned loved ones because all snails carry parasites. This myth is part true, but not all snails carry parasites. So what they mean by all snails carry parasites is that slugs and snails can carry the rat lungworm parasite. A few things to note. if your snail was born in captivity, odds are it does not have this. Can it be transmitted to humans? It can. Don't let this scare you. I'm gonna go more into it. So if your snail was, first of all, born in captivity, it wasn't taken from outside at all, at any point in its life, its parents are captive, all of that, then you're fine. It probably doesn't have it. Now, if you get your snails from outside, like I've gotten mine from outside, there is slightly more of a risk. But again, don't let this scare you. So while some slugs and snails do have this, the rat lungworm has geographical limitations to it. And while it can be transmitted to humans, it is still rare, and mostly comes from people eating escargot, from people who are preparing it not well. So I guess my first tip would just be not to eat your pet snail, would be number one. Most people get this from ingesting a snail that has been infected. Again, this is why a lot of laws around food are so big, to avoid this. So if people don't really know what they're doing when they make escargot, for example, then you can develop this, you can get this. The other way to prevent this from happening is simply to wear gloves when you handle your snail, which you should already do anyway, and to wash your hands after holding them, like you should be doing with any exotic anyway. As long as you don't eat your pet snail, you hold it with gloves on, or at the very least, wash your hands thoroughly after handling, then you should be good. I do recommend wearing gloves and washing your hands thoroughly, by the way. Not because it's like super contagious, like every snail has it. Any exotic, you should wash your hand right after handling, is just basic hygiene with them. So yeah, it's kind of the same myth as like snakes. All snakes carry salmonella kind of thing, and it's not accurate. Yes, they can, but it's not much of a risk. So I can see where those concerned loved ones are coming from, and they do just mean well, and they just care about you. So if you have a concerned loved one, just tell them the facts of it. Let them know, like, hey, it's not so bad. It's rare. It can be prevented. I'm not gonna eat my snail. I'm gonna wash my hands after handling. All that stuff. You should be good to go. You're not gonna be in the same room and just get it by being in the same room as your snail. So that is all for my 5 snail keeping myths. When I started in the hobby, these myths were huge. They were everywhere. I didn't feed my snails a lot of stuff for a long time because of these myths. And now I know. The snail keeping is getting better every day, which is wonderful. We are improving every day, and it's fantastic. But luckily, science is improving, and I'm sure that in a couple more years, there's going to be more on this list that I believe now are facts that are going to turn out being like, hey, that's actually a myth. So, happens all the time. It still happens with keeping snakes. It still happens with keeping dogs. So, it's par for the course. But yeah, I really hope you guys enjoyed today's video. I hope you got something out of it and that it was helpful to you, or at the very least entertaining to you, or I don't know, you just like to learn about snails. As always, go follow me over on Instagram. It's at Ollie_exotics. The link is in the description below. You can also follow my art account. It is at Crafting Creatures over on Instagram. Link is also in the description below. I also do have a Facebook group. Links in the description below as well. It is called Thriving Over Surviving. It is where we can just talk about our pets, share pictures with our pets, and get some advice for our pets. Any pets welcome. It's mostly exotic based, but any pets welcome. I also do have a Patreon if you want to go check that out. It would be super helpful for me to put food in the enclosures and whatnot. So go check out those perks over there. It is just Ollie Exotics, links in the description below as well. And as always, give this video a like for the algorithm, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you like this kind of content, or really any animal kind of content. I upload every single Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, but you can hit the bell if you don't remember all of that. And I'll see you next week. Bye!